Dylan Mortensen, one of two surviving roommates, and an extremely unreliable witness. Especially considering how law enforcement is taking advantage of someone who was sleepy and drunk, so they can manipulate her narrative to fit theirs. And that's who they want on the stand against Kohberger. Since apparently Brian's team says the other roommate, Bethany, has exculpatory evidence. Which means, any information that helps to clear the defendant of guilt, or makes their innocence more plausible. Let's get into the reasons of why Dylan can't be trusted on the stand.
DM is considered an eyewitness, and eyewitness testimony is some of, if not the most impactful testimony in a trial. The testimony must be subject to close scrutiny before its admission is allowed. We seek that the use of the descriptor, bushy eyebrows, be excluded from use at trial because the witness with this descriptor is completely uncertain of what she remembers, and her description is derived from seeing the intruder for only a second. Whether this court applies Manson-Biggers, which I would say is not completely right on point because there wasn't a photo lineup and there wasn't a show up, or the court considers the science behind memory, the criteria you must look at is what factors influence the accuracy of the memory and make the testimony reliable, because reliability is the linchpin in determining the admissibility of identification testimony. Between Manson-Biggers and the science of memory, there are several factors that are consistently considered, and I'm going to go through a few of those. Factor one, what was the opportunity to see? This is also known as first phase of development of memory, or the acquisition phase, and distance, lighting, and duration of exposure are important. DM is uncertain about the lighting. The stairs to her left were not lit. The kitchen may or may not have been lit, and the twinkle lights in the living room may have been lit. She described seeing the person for, quote, only a second, end quote. The person may have been 3 feet from her, or he may have been walking to exit out the back sliding glass door. The back door is further than 3 feet from her door and is not visible from where she was standing. We submitted 2 pictures as our exhibits to show you the vantage point of where she was standing in her bedroom. Her opportunity to see supports unreliability. Factor two, the witness's degree of attention. This is where amount of alcohol has a significant impact on the analysis. She described herself as, quote, probably very drunk, and given the amount of alcohol she told law enforcement about consuming the entire day, that makes sense. She started with champagne mimosas in the morning, then White Claws 9 to 10 throughout the day. Then that night before she got home, she was involved in a drinking game and drank Borg, which is hard alcohol and flavoring. Her degree of attention, given this, supports unreliability. Factor three, the accuracy of the description. Her description is that she saw a person wearing all black, not insanely tall. She doesn't know if she saw lips and nose. She is certain he is white. She never mentions eyebrows herself initially. The person who asked about eyebrows was law enforcement. In her second interview, Detective Mowry asked her if she saw the eyes, saw eyebrows. She never said anything about bushy eyebrows. Then in her third interview with Detective Gooch, she said she didn't know what the eyes looked like or the color of the eyebrows. That's for the first time that she mentioned bushy eyebrows. This lack of accuracy supports unreliability. Factor four, what is the level of certainty of the witness? In each of the 5 interviews, she says over and over again, she doesn't know if anything she says is accurate because she felt like she was in a dream state, frozen shock, fuzzy and cloudy, like wearing blurry glasses, influenced by alcohol, and sleepy. She has an absolute lack of certainty. This supports unreliability. Factor 5, the science of memory looks to confabulation. When the acquisition of memory, the first factor that I talked about, is impacted by emotion and stress. In this case, that is an important consideration. Confabulation is defined as the creation or substitution of false memories through later suggestions that fill in the gaps of missing memory. DM expresses in each interview how she was afraid and did not know what she was hearing, and also contradicts this when she thought everything was, quote, okay, and MXKE was simply just passed out on the floor. Later suggestion under this definition of confabulation is Detective Mowry asking her about eyebrows and each law enforcement officer, then reinforcing that in each interview. She never used the word balaclava. Yet Detective Gooch asked her if she had ever heard of one, explained what one was and that it's used to hide identity, showed her a picture of one, and then had her draw one. This is law enforcement filling in the gaps. This also impacts the last factor, which is factor 6, post-event misinformation effect impacting retained information, exposure to subsequent information. Law enforcement, upon initial appearance at the scene, did not ever break up all of the people that were there. They then go to the police station, and after that, on the night of November 13th, those that were at the house when law enforcement arrived stayed together in a hotel room. So DM was basically together with other witnesses from the time that when they first called friends to come to the house, before they called law enforcement, all the way through the night. She was interviewed twice by law enforcement. That created this exposure to bushy eyebrows. And then that term was used in the probable cause affidavit, and the media seized upon it from the very beginning, causing post-event exposure, which affects how DM's memory is retained. This factor supports unreliability. When you look at all of these factors, or the totality of the circumstances, the way the state argues it, the linchpin, the reliability, is not there. The state wants to bolster a person who admittedly has no clear memory with a photo of Mr. Kohberger to say, this is the person she identified. DM told police that she looked at Mr. Kohberger's arrest picture and did not recognize him. The state cannot run around her unreliability by entering into evidence a photo to show it's a person that she says she cannot identify, because the state's interpretation is that Mr. Kohberger's photo shows bushy eyebrows. That is misleading to the jury. It will confuse the jury. It will be putting words into the mouth of DM that do not exist. While they might not seek to do that on the stand with her by admitting a photo through her testimony off of his phone, if they make the argument in an opening statement that that description of bushy eyebrows is supported by a photo taken on his phone the next day, that kind of prejudice is beyond repair. The state also claims that because DM draws pictures of eyes and eyebrows, she is more reliable in her identification of them. But that is not the way law enforcement appeared to have viewed the artwork as they photographed it and reported on it. Given the science of memory and its acquisition, retention, and retrieval, this could be what is filling in her memory gaps as opposed to actual memory. When you apply the critical factors that a court must take into consideration for eyewitness testimony regarding identification, the words bushy eyebrows should be excluded. The heart of the issue is whether or not the witness is reliable enough on the issue to let the words be spoken to the jury when it comes to the description. DM said that she could not do a composite sketch because she doesn't think she saw a face. She doesn't think she saw a face. The court should enter an order excluding the words. Thank you.
Okay, so before we dive into what I'm referring to about the Fed screwing or attempting to screw Dylan, I'm going to give you a brief background as to who I am. So my girlfriend is in Dylan's inner circle. And by inner circle, I mean inner circle. Like they've hung out almost every day since the incident occurred. And I've seen her a plethora of times as well. So you're going to notice I'm not going to use words like allegedly, supposedly, because all of this is actual firsthand factual information. Where should I start? To clear things up. First of all, there's a lot of misconception about Dylan suffering from PTSD or trauma or any of that. None of that is accurate. In fact, when we try to console Dylan after the incident, she's the one that was laughing at me and my girlfriend and I, talking about we're so weird when we try to give her a hug and stuff. So she's still the same old Dylan. She's had a rough life, grown up, she's been through a lot. She doesn't have PTSD and didn't suffer any trauma. The incident that night, and what I'm referring to with the Fed actually put a lot of words into her mouth that she didn't say herself first. So there was a lot of leading statements that they were insinuating to her, and she was really scared the first few days, obviously, after the incident occurred. So like the reason none of it makes sense in the affidavit is because it didn't really happen that way. So she never stood there shocked when she saw the individual. She was just standing in a doorway, like, like anybody who opens the door. It was just, she opened the door and yelled at Ethan and Xana, and who she thought was their friend. She yelled at them to be quiet. That's what was going on with that situation. And she just went back into the room. She locked the door like usual, and went to sleep. Everything was quiet after she yelled at them, so she didn't think anything of it. For everyone who's creating these random stories about her being shocked or traumatized, she didn't realize anything was going on. And it might sound crazy, it might sound dumb, but she really had no clue anything was going on. They're being a little loud, so she yelled at them to be quiet. And that's it. She locked her door, and she just went back to her room. And she didn't want to be nosy or anything. So, she was kind of new to that house, so she didn't want to be nosy and, get all up in their business, especially at, in the middle of the night or early morning. So it's as simple as that. Everyone trying to blow that whole situation into something that's not. So yeah, that's that. And she didn't actually get a real good look at Brian. At the time, she assumed it was one of Xana and Ethan's friend who was just getting ready to leave, who was walking out. She didn't get that good of a look. The feds were really aggressive with Dylan the first few days, which is why she hired the attorney to begin with, because of the treatment of her during the interview, more like an interrogation, to be honest. So that's why she got an attorney, because the way they were talking to her, and they didn't really understand or believe why she's the only one alive when you kind of skip rooms to get to the other two rooms. So she didn't really like the feel of how the the interrogators or the feds were talking to her. And within like a few days after the incident, they approached her with pictures of Brian. It was like, is this the guy? Do you think this is the guy? This is definitely him, right? And they were almost leading her to believe this has to be the person. And she wasn't really sure, but they kind of put those words in her mouth. It's almost like, they were insinuating it so much to where she was like, I think, no, it's definitely him. And that's when they just kind of like ran with it. So what you see in the affidavit is, it didn't play out that way. So Dylan's attorney and her, and actually all of us, are pretty upset at how they threw her under the bus in the affidavit. When's the last time you've seen a witness or like a snitch in a case, their actual names being mentioned? The fact that they didn't redact it. We all think that the feds and prosecutors threw her name in there purposely to apply more pressure, because Dylan was really wishy-washy during the interrogation. And with them, putting these words, set in stone on paper, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on her now, because everyone views her as like some star witness, the star of the case. So that's what we all believe, that she kind of is getting screwed over by, the feds and the prosecutor, because now she has to testify, and she has to say kind of what words they put in her mouth instead of what she actually believed, and what she actually knows happened, like with her own words, not words that were like shoved in her mouth, So yeah, her attorney's pretty upset. She's pretty upset, but at the same time, she knows that, she can be a huge help in this case. So it's not like she's identifying somebody she didn't see. It just didn't play out necessarily like, oh, bushy eyebrows. She saw bushy eyebrows, and was able to 100% identify him, It's just initially when, detectives and feds came in and took over the scene had been contaminated so badly by the local authorities. When they first came, first responders, they stomped all over the place, contaminated the scene. All the, other people that were at the house, they were, walking up and down the steps, to make sure what they're seeing is what they're really seeing. So, I mean, this is a scene that was really badly contaminated. So to equal the playing field, the feds feel like, having a star witness is critical here. But just the way she was being interrogated initially was, it's kind of crazy. It's not what you guys think. They weren't being all sensitive and gentle to her. They were really accusatory and kind of, pressured, put the press on her. Thought that she might have something to do with it, because it just didn't make sense to them why she's the only one alive. And on top of that, didn't see anything or really hear anything. She didn't want to be nosy, didn't want to, get up in her roommate's business. She told him to be quiet. I mean, the last thing that crossed their mind was people are getting slaughtered next door and upstairs, So, I think that's pretty much everything I've covered. So yeah, just to go over the whole, suffering trauma. She was shocked that she saw him walk past her. Like, it's not as dramatic as you guys think. Like, he was already halfway towards the kitchen and walking out. And for all of y'all that are scratching your heads, yes, police do lie. They've kind of thrown everybody around the ringer through this whole case from the very start. And you have to think about it. Why would a survivor or a victim have to hire an attorney? Obviously, they were mistreating her pretty badly as they're interrogating her, especially now throwing her name in the affidavit like that. That's all because they're pretty upset she hired an attorney to begin with, and because they want to put a lot of pressure on her from the public for her to be the star witness. But aside from that, she's doing good. She's the same old Dylan. Yeah, no, there's no trauma, PTSD, anything. She really feels for, her friends who are deceased, and, she does beat herself up a little bit about, not being more involved in the situation that night. But, realistically, I mean, something like that's not gonna cross your mind that something like that's taking place in your house. So yeah, she does feel for the family, and, she's really saddened by the whole situation. But as far as her as an individual, she's still the same person. She's not like a traumatized individual, So yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything. And, let's see. Yeah, no, that's everything. Hopefully this video doesn't come off sounding crazy, and clears up a lot of the questions everybody has. All right. They were really accusatory and kind of, pressured, put the press on her. Thought that she might have something to do with it because it just didn't make sense to them why she's the only one alive.
So was Bethany there, or not? And what did she see and hear that is exculpatory evidence, that nobody else has? So what do you think? The court part was insane and the clip after that. Nobody believed the guy at the time, but as we know, it seems like most of the rumors we heard from the beginning have seemed to be true, and what he's saying does sound like it could have happened that way. Let me know your thoughts on everything.
She doesn't think she saw a face.